The views and opinions expressed do not necessarily reflect those of Access Fort Wayne, the Allen County Public Library, or any other supporting groups. If you'd like to produce a show, call us at 260-421-1250.
Hello, and welcome to the American Veteran. I'm Dale Parrish, your host, with Carl Fowler as co-host. Dave Luker will be a Marine, Vietnam vet, will be sitting in with us. And our guest today is Dave Jones. Welcome to the show, gentlemen.
Thank you.
Dave, was you drafted or did you join?
I was drafted.
And when was that?
It was 1967.
Took basic?
Took basic at Fort Bragg, North Carolina.
Yeah.
Then I took advanced training at Fort Jackson, South Carolina.
What's advanced training?
That's where you're sent to train in your Pacific area that you've been assigned. For example, if you're going to be in artillery, they'll send you to a particular fort that emphasizes that.
Usually Fort Sill, I think, for that.
Could be. But I went to Jackson, and then I got my orders from Jackson to go to Vietnam, but with the 1st Cav. But I have a twin brother that happened to be in Vietnam at the time with the Marine Corps. So during the Vietnam era, they would not put brothers in the same combat zone.
Yeah.
So they sent me to Fort Hood, Texas. Well, Fort Knox first to learn how to operate Army personnel carriers, and then to Fort Hood, Texas, until my brother's orders were to come home and I got my orders to go over. In fact, the Marine Corps contacted me at my unit, said that my twin would extend another tour to keep me from going.
Oh.
But I said, no, it's my turn, so he got his orders to come home and I got mine to go over. So like 3 months later, I was on the way. We formed up a new battalion at Fort Hood, Texas, part of the 198th Infantry. Was sent to Vietnam.
The whole battalion went together?
We all flew over together, right?
Yeah. Did they train together here in the States? Is that the way they do it?
We trained at Fort Hood. They're bringing all new fellows into Fort Hood, Texas. And I think I was the 3rd member in my company. And then we all trained together, and then we all flew to Vietnam, landed at Chu Lai, Vietnam.
Yeah, I think that's good. Train together, rather than as a replacement.
Right. But at that particular time, they had what they called the infusion program, and which later on they decided was not a good thing to have because you train together for 3 or 4 months.
Yeah.
Get to know each other and how everybody works and responds. And then when you got to Vietnam, they would infuse you into other units.
Oh.
And so that broke up that working ability you had with everybody.
Yeah.
And that kind of hurt. That took away some of our working together.
Sure it would. Sure it would.
And I was in the infantry. In the Army, it's 11B, 11 Bravo. It was Charlie Company, 3rd Platoon, and they made me a team leader as soon as we got to Vietnam, and gave me the E5 stripes.
I see.
And I had at that time, well, yeah. At that time, when Westmoreland, after we were there for a while, when Westmoreland left Vietnam, and General Abrams took over, one of the first things he did is he got rid of Khe Sanh, where the Marines were at, and then they developed what they call hunter-killer teams, which consisted of 7 to 6 guys to a team. And they assigned me a team. There were 6 in my team, and the idea was that they'd have all these teams they're spread out over the area in Vietnam, and it would make it easier to go to help someone else out if they needed it, because they had all these teams scattered out through Vietnam. So there were 6 in my team.
Okay. Was any of those 6, was you familiar with their work?
Yeah, well, I trained with all of them.
Okay,
Yeah.
okay, okay.
Right.
I see you got the CIB, the Combat Infantry Badge, and a Purple Heart.
Yes. The CIB, I didn't know I had it until you're coming home from the Vietnam, and they arrange all your ribbons or your medals and let you know what you've been given,
Right.
and the CIB was part of that. And the CIB, it stands for Combat Infantry Badge.
Right.
Right.
So usually it pertains to guys that are in combat.
Yeah, right.
Very coveted by many guys that don't have it.
Yes,
Okay.
it's not. Yeah, got to earn it, I guess.
Right.
And I can remember coming home on the plane. One of the stewardess had every ribbon you could probably think that's made on her chest. And I stopped her and I says, I think you have everything except the Combat Infantry Badge. And she made the comment, she says, well, nobody gives that up because it takes, you got to earn that.
You bet.
And I said, well, I'll tell you what, I'll give you mine. So I gave her my CIB because I knew that once I got cleared from the Army, they'd make sure that you had all your medals and ribbons.
Yeah.
So I knew I would get another one. So I
Yeah.
gave her the CIB, so I think she was complete. As far as my Purple Heart badge, that happened on November 2nd, 1968, at 7:15. I was chosen to pick a driver to go pick up one of my lieutenants that was out scouting an area of operations we were going to go into the next day. And so I got a Jeep. Picked up a Jeep and a driver. And then one of my other lieutenants, who had just gotten out of the hospital from being wounded, asked if he could tag along. I said, sure. So we had to go to a certain LZ out of west of Chulai, Vietnam, to wait for Lieutenant Tucker to be brought in so we could pick him up. But so on the way, I said, well, I'm going to stop by Division at Chulai and get some beer for the company. So we went in Chulai and picked up 7 cases of Ballantine beer. Now normally nobody would buy that beer anyways, but that's all that was left. So in a Jeep, those fit perfectly in the back of a Jeep where you all sit. So it's flat across there. So we go to pick up Lieutenant Tucker, and we're waiting, and it starts getting dark. And finally the helicopter comes and drops him off and takes off. And since I thought it was my mission, I said, well, I think we should stay here tonight and not drive back in the dark.
Yeah.
Well, Lieutenant Tucker and my other lieutenant, Lieutenant Kerr, went to OCS together. Lieutenant Kerr graduated 30 minutes before Lieutenant Tucker. Now we're standing there, and I'm saying, well, I think we ought to stay here. And Lieutenant Tucker spoke up and says, Jones, what's this on your sleeve right here? And I said, Sergeant. He says, what's this on my collar? I says, Second Lieutenant, sir. He says, you ever heard of RHIP? Rank has its privilege. We're not going to spend the night in the jungle. I said, yes, sir. So when you ride in a vehicle, the ranking officer sits in the shotgun seat, and then you go counterclockwise in rank around to the driver. So it was Lieutenant Kerr, Lieutenant Tucker, me, and then my driver, a young boy from White Plains, New York, Italian kid. So we're driving back, and it's dark, and you have just the slit lights on your Jeep.
Yeah.
And we were on Highway 1, getting close to our battalion base camp, and this one culvert had been blown up the night before, so obviously my driver was careful. But the Viet Cong had an ambush set up at that culvert. And we got close enough to that culvert, and they set off that ambush. So the driver was able to drive us through the ambush. And in the meantime, we got our weapons and we're trying to fire back, but it was during the monsoon season. We had the canvas on a Jeep, which make it a little difficult. So I'm firing, whatever you do, it's happening so fast. And then we kind of get through the ambush, and I notice that my Lieutenant Kerr is about ready to fall out of the Jeep. So I reach over and grab him. He'd been wounded the worst. And so I leaned over him, and he was shot up pretty bad, and I wanted to put a tourniquet on his left leg there for him, which I ended up doing and kind of holding him in the Jeep.
Yeah.
And the driver was able to get us back to our battalion base and through because it was under fire too, our perimeter. And we get up to the main helicopter pad, and they have a medevac helicopter there waiting. And I didn't even know I'd been hit. And I think the one reason for that is that your adrenaline is going so, you're pumped up so much.
Yeah.
And going through the actions that we went through, that the medic finally asked me, Jones, do you think you got hit? And at that time is when I felt in my lower back, and I'd been hit in my lower back. So they threw me on the helicopter and flew us to the hospital in Chulai, and took us into the operating room. And to this day, the one thing I remember is how cold it was in that operating room. Air conditioned. I mean, you felt like crud, but it felt good because it was cold, and then everything else is hot.
I seen Doug shaking his head. Yes, it's cold in there.
Yeah.
I remember a cold operating room myself.
Yeah, and you just see operating table after operating table. So they patch us all up and roll us out in the hallway, and I'm in between my two lieutenants. And Lieutenant Kerr asked me if I'd light him a cigarette, which I did. And he was in a vacuum environment from his waist down to keep out germs and that. He was going home. They were flying him to California. And Lieutenant Tucker, he'd been hit in the shoulder. And they figured that I got hit after Lieutenant Tucker got hit, and they figured that the bullet went through him and part of his M16 and hit me in the back. Or I was hit with what they call an AK shell hit me, but they think it went through Lieutenant Tucker first, and then his weapon, and then it hit me in the back.
Yeah.
Which would have taken quite a bit of the velocity off.
Slowed
of
it down,
right? Yeah.
Because I remember the surgeon came over and says, "I'm going to roll you over, Jones, to see if there's a hole on the other side." And I said, "Well, if there was a hole there, I'd let you know it." And so they did kind of an exploratory operation on me and patched me up and sent me outside into an area, a tent with other wounded guys. And, so the next day, I'm laying there on my bunk, and my company commander and battalion executive officer and my first sergeant comes in, and the sergeant's carrying my rifle, my helmet, my flak jacket, and a 6-pack of this Ballantine beer. Mm-hmm. And out of 7 cases of Ballantine beer, 6 cans survived that ambush.
Oh, geez.
We got shot up pretty bad.
Yeah.
We're very fortunate, very fortunate.
Yeah.
Because my driver just floored it and just drove through that ambush.
Yeah.
But we were very fortunate, and of course they started reaming me out why I let it happen, since it was my mission.
Yeah.
That's just kind of. I mean, they were doing it jokingly. Fortunately,
Right.
they were.
You had a,
they were able
you had
to
a
do
good
it.
excuse.
Yeah. I said I just got outranked. I mean,
Mm-hmm.
But I was there probably about 4 days. They sent me back to my unit. And then about a month later, I caught it's similar to malaria.
Oh.
And it turned out to be amoebic dysentery.
Oh.
And that's when you really want somebody to shoot you.
Yeah.
You just want to be put out of your misery.
Boy.
But they flew me to the hospital and finally figured out what it was, and got me feeling better, and then sent me back to my unit again. And
How long was you laid up with that?
that was about 2 weeks.
2 weeks.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah. How long was the lieutenant laid up, or did he go back on duty, or they send him home?
Lieutenant Kerr they sent home. Lieutenant Tucker, I don't know, he came back to duty, but I don't know how long he was laid up. But
Yeah.
about 22 years later, I came to the library here because I was always curious on how Lieutenant Kerr was, whether he lost his leg or what happened.
Yeah.
And a gentleman here at the library helped me find him because I knew he was an attorney. And I had heard that he was living in Las Vegas. So through some computer things, we found this law firm, and Terry Kerr was an associate in his law firm. So I phoned him, and I got the secretary, and I says, now don't hang up on me, because I'm going to tell you something, and I don't want you to think that I'm, you know, being smart. And I explained to her who I was, and asked her if Lieutenant Kerr, if he walked with a cane or a crutch. She says, well, sometimes he does both. He has both. And I said, okay. And I told her, I said, just write on a piece of paper, write November 2nd, 7/15, 1968, and just put my cell number down there. And don't say anything else, because he happened to be in his office. 15 minutes later, he called me.
Oh, yeah.
And I bet we talked for an hour.
Yeah.
But yeah, he's an attorney living in Las Vegas. Still now and then has some problems with his wounds.
Yeah.
But they were able to save his leg. He got hit 9 times.
Wow.
And
Yeah.
Boy, that's a lots of
Yeah.
lead.
yeah, and
Yeah.
it was, and when I saw him getting ready to fall out of that Jeep, you know, I just reached over and you just grab him and pull him back in, and then I, you know, put a tourniquet on him and then held him into the Jeep until we were able to get to a safer place.
Yeah.
But
So you get some pictures there, Dave. What?
well, this first picture is just a picture of a bunch of dirty combat guys taking a break in the jungle, and because I know when I was always younger, I'd look at pictures and it says, geez, those guys look awful dirty, you know. But that's, you get dirty. I mean,
Oh yeah.
and it's so warm, nobody, you know, you don't wear a shirt. You cut the sleeves off, and plus at the same time you're carrying a rucksack on your back that's probably 70, 80 pounds at
Yeah.
most, mostly full of extra ammunition and some sea rations.
So all you do would be just sweating all the time, right?
You sweat all the time.
Sweat
it's,
all
it's
the
just
time.
hot. They'd give you salt tablets and things like that, and then you put up with the mosquitoes, and then you put up with the leeches and the scorpions and
Snakes.
and snakes now and then.
Yeah.
I didn't see too many snakes, but I had an Indian. There was an Indian in my platoon, an Indian fellow, American Indian. He had the sharpest eyes I've ever. So he could says, "Hey Jones, look at that snake over there." I couldn't see it. You know, he could. But yeah, and so you drink a lot of water. And,
Yeah. Yeah.
and they give you. In my particular case, what happened to me, they think, is we were chasing a bunch of the Viet Cong, and they were killing animals and dumping them, their innards and that into the waterfall and the streams, and we were filling our canteens, even though they give you iodine tablets to put in your canteen to help purify it.
Yeah.
I think that's where I picked up the malaria bug.
Oh.
It's because of that.
Yeah.
And but that's just a picture of just a couple, you know, dirty GIs, you know, just congregating together there. This picture here is we're going in on a combat assault, commonly called a CA. And before we were landing, I asked my radio man if he'd take a picture of me jumping out of the helicopter. So he got out first and went over and hid behind a rock. And then when I bailed out here, if y'all can see it, that's Jones jumping out of that helicopter.
Now that terrain looks similar to what we would have around here, although it's hilly probably.
Yeah, this happened to be down in a little valley, but most of the time in the jungle, it might take you 2-3 hours to hack your way maybe 50 yards.
Well, it's that thick.
It's that thick, yeah.
Very thick.
And one time we were going through the jungle, and we had 2 guys up front using the machetes, and I remember holding a weapon to one of the guys, and all of a sudden the guy, he started sinking down in the ground. So we grabbed him, pulled him back up, and we were able to make it back off this mountain. And what had happened was the jungle growth was growing out over the edge of the mountain, over a cliff.
Oh.
And it was so thick you couldn't see down through it.
But it supported him for a little bit.
Supported us for a little bit, and he started going down, and so it's very thick. It's just
Very dangerous.
yeah, and you're not, everything's around you. And I talked to some of the fellows that come back from Iraq and the current situations we're in, and we in Vietnam said, boy, I wish we had more space. You know, I wish we could see more.
Well, sure, because your vision was
And
very
then-
limited.
And these fellows over there in the conflicts they're in now, they have so much open space. They wish they
Right.
had a few more
Yes.
Trees to hide
and
behind.
hide behind and things like that.
Right. I
And
understand.
And they have what they call grass. We called it wait a minute grass because it had barbs on it, and it would grab you, and you'd have to wait a minute and back up a little bit. And it's just very thick. We knew we had a fella trapped, and we knew he wasn't more than probably 10 feet away from us, but we couldn't find him. You could hear him moving, but we never did find him. And they don't, you know, the enemy didn't carry a lot of where we were at. They didn't carry a lot of equipment with them, so they're able to move fast and get away, and compared to the more sophisticated Viet Cong army that was up north.
Sure.
And things like that. But it was just a different environment. And
How many helicopter rides did you take then?
oh,
Quite a few?
there'll be hundreds.
Hundreds?
Yeah. Yep.
That was your regular mode of travel then?
Right.
Probably.
Right.
You going into a landing zone and spread out from there? Is that it, or
Right.
what?
Sometimes a lot of times a landing zone might be prepared for us in a way by artillery or the Air Force.
Okay.
And
you had
then
bomb-
we also worked with the Marines.
Sure.
So you go in and you get in as fast as you can because helicopters are very easy to shoot down, and most of the time they don't. Most of the time you have to bail out. You know, you're at least 6, maybe 10 feet off the ground. They don't get close to the ground too much. We went into a hot LZ one time to declare it for another company, and we had 24. We had 12 helicopters that each carried about 6 combat guys, and then we had 2 gunships for each helicopter. And we went in there, and they were waiting on us, and the helicopters ran out of ammunition. We were shooting from the helicopter also, so we had to turn around and go back to Tam Key, place in Vietnam there, and reload and go back in again.
First time it was just too hot for you.
Made it the second time, yeah. And I remember the pilot was hovering over this bomb crater, and it was 10 or 15 feet drop. So I'm trying to get him to lower it a little bit, but he wouldn't do it. So, but you got to get out.
But
know,
you're carrying lots of weight, probably, right?
So you just threw your rucksack out, threw your helmet out, tossed your M16 to one of your buddies down there on the ground already,
Catch it.
and you just jump out. Fortunately, it was a relatively soft landing because it was a bomb crater, so it was sandy.
Yeah, the dirt was stirred up.
So we were able to do that.
How many men did the helicopter haul?
Well, you had the 2 pilots, and you had two door gunners, one on each side, and then you could get 6, usually 6 combat guys in.
Okay.
And because you had to be careful of a weight requirement, because there was a lot of weight just with 6 guys, what you carry, because your rucksack was pretty doggone heavy, and but usually held about 6
Yeah.
guys. And
What's the other picture in behind there, Dave?
this picture here is we got into a firefight around this village, and which lasted maybe a couple hours, and we were able to secure the village and gather the people that were in the village, mostly guys, you know, and a lot of women, little kids, things like that, which you had to be careful because of the kids when you get into firefights like that. And the thing about it over there is, if we killed a farmer's water buffalo, we had to pay him $50. If we killed his son, there's no charge. And it was different.
That seems strange, you know.
Yeah.
But the water buffalo was his means of living.
That's right. And they're huge. They're big.
Yeah.
But we lost one fella in this firefight, which, as you guys know, you lose a buddy. You know, you want to.
You're mad.
You're mad.
Yeah.
And
You're
so,
angry and everything. Yes.
Yeah. And so we mentioned the fact that we had everybody crowd up, ready to be taken back to division or whatever, and about our comrade that was killed, and so they gave us orders to burn the village. So we burned the village.
Yeah.
Their village is wood, straw, what?
Straw, thatched roofs,
Thatch,
all wood.
Burned pretty easily.
Pretty easily. Yep.
Okay.
And then one of my, I didn't have a picture of blowing up for that because a lot of my pictures were on slides, and I'm converting them into pictures.
Yeah.
But because of my size, obviously we're out standing looking at this tunnel. So I remember one of my lieutenants said, Jones, I need a volunteer to be a tunnel rat.
Yes.
And he says, you don't have to, I'll let you a little time to think about it. So I'm looking at this tunnel, and I'm thinking all things that might happen being a tunnel rat. But at the same time, I'm thinking, you know, Jones, if you become a tunnel rat and everything goes right and you make it home okay, and you get married and you have kids, you'll have stories to tell them. So I became a tunnel rat, didn't have any kids, and I'm not married.
Yeah.
So, and that was interesting. That was interesting. I don't know if I could do it today.
Just armed with a 45?
A 45 and earplugs. But then that's kind of a catch-22 because you got to be able to hear when you're in a tunnel.
Exactly, because you don't know what's around the next corner, right?
And you got to be careful if you shoot the 45 because it can damage your ears.
Yeah.
Yes.
So I learned real quick that in some of these tunnels weren't much wider than me, but then there were other tunnels that you had more room. In some tunnels I found you could walk around in. There'd be a room like this, all underground.
Yeah.
And but I learned that if I had to fire, if I was fortunate to be able to do that, because you had a flashlight too, that I would hold the flashlight up as high as I could in the tunnel. So if they were going to, hopefully if they're going to fire at me, they'd fire at the light. And then I'd be down lower and I could return fire. But most of the tunnels I checked out were not occupied in the sense of a lot of enemy in the tunnel. Found a lot of maps and some weapons and ammunition, cooking utensils, things like medical supplies, things like that in the tunnels. And, I only had one scary moment in the sense that, but they were as scared as I was probably, and they took off because they always have an exit somewhere in the tunnel. But, and one of the things they did is you had to be careful because they'd sometimes booby trap the tunnels. They had a tendency to put snakes in the tunnels, but they'd fasten the tail of the snake so it wouldn't crawl away. So if Jones comes along, maybe that snake is still alive and he can bite you. They'd do things like that.
Did they blow the tunnels in?
Some of them we did. We usually popped smoke after I came back out to see if we could see if it came up anywhere else in the jungle and things like that. But we blew up a big tunnel complex up north. It was a big one.
Gentlemen, we're out of time. Appreciate you telling us your story, Dave. If you enjoyed the show, we're on every Friday night at 7:30. And remember, freedom is not free. So if you see a veteran or someone in uniform, just walk up to them and shake their hand and say, thank you for your service. Thank you and good night.